So the Bengals made a fascinating coaching hire this week, and while he's a lot different than the guy he's replacing, his responsibilities in Cincinnati are also going to be a little bit different, and in this video, I'll explain why that's the best decision the Bengals could have made. Hi again, Bengals fans. John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here, and I'm making this video a little bit late because when the Bengals made their first official coaching hire of the offseason with Scott Peters as the new offensive line coach, I needed to do a little bit more research. I needed to learn a little bit more about him because I didn't have a fully fledged opinion on him when they made the hire. And even after learning a little bit about him, who he was as a coach, I was still having a little bit of pause as to why the Bengals made this decision in the first place. And we'll get into all that in a couple minutes, but I did start to think about one name in particular upon learning more about Scott Peters, and it's none other than Willie Anderson. Because for the past decade, the Bengals have dealt with offensive line development issues, coaching, the whole 9 yards, right? The unit has never really been in a stable place for the better part of the last 10 years now. And Willie's name has always been brought up by fans as someone that the team should consider hiring to just be the offensive line coach. Because not only is Willie the second greatest offensive lineman in Bengals history behind only Anthony Munoz, who is the greatest offensive tackle in NFL history, he's now a coach in his past playing days. He's not a coach of any team specifically, but he's a coach of individual offensive linemen. He brings in clients, particularly young players, and helps them out with their development and technique. And Willie is very active on social media. He's been very open about not wanting to join the ranks of NFL coaching because typically offensive line coaches are more tasked with developing scheme and making sure the entire unit plays as one rather than focusing on individual development. And that's what I find so interesting about the Scott Peters hire, because this feels like the closest the Bengals are ever going to get to hiring someone like Willie Anderson for this job. Because Scott Peters only has 1 year of being an offensive line coach and about 4 years of being an assistant. He got his start by being who Willie Anderson is now. He's mostly known for being a former player who then opened up a practice for teaching advanced new ways of pass protecting for offensive linemen. And he's not only known for it, he's well renowned in that area. Jim McNally, who was the Bengals offensive line coach during the 80s, he coached Anthony Munoz. He had nothing but effusive praise for Scott Peters all the way back in 2015. And when the Bengals made that hire, he went to Twitter and said he's going to make the Bengals great again. McNally actually coached Peters back in 2003 when they were both with the Giants. And then 12 years later, McNally then connected Peters to Bill Callahan, who hired him as a consultant when he was with Washington. Like, that is how respected this guy is among legends within this industry. If Jim McNally and Bill Callahan are both in your corner, you're obviously doing something right from a coaching perspective. So that is objectively cool for the Bengals' new offensive line coach to be one of the best and most highly respected teachers in the sport. That alone feels like a direct deviation from former offensive line coach Frank Pollock, who I thought did a good job of implementing scheme, but obviously one of the biggest criticisms with him was that he didn't really elevate anyone's play along that offensive line. He wasn't that great at individual development from some of the guys that needed to really hit. And I think with Peters, you have a better chance of maximizing the guys that you want to keep along this offensive line, as well as anyone that you want to add from here on out. And despite all of that, there was still something that gave me pause here, because Frank Pollock wasn't just the offensive line coach. He was solely responsible for coordinating the run game as the run game coordinator. He was responsible for trying to marry a shotgun passing offense with the run game, and clearly the match just wasn't there. And the main similarity between both Pollock and Peters is that they were both assistants under Bill Callahan. Callahan obviously known for the under center wide zone run game that Pollock tried to bring to Cincinnati, but clearly wasn't a fit with the Joe Burrow offense, which leads to a question that I have for the Bengals now. Is that the kind of run game that Peters is also most comfortable with as well? And that may not be a question that we'll get the answer to, but by all accounts, Peters is said to not only be a great teacher, but extremely adaptable to scheme in accordance to what his players do best. And perhaps most importantly, Peters told Dan Horde of the Bengals Booth podcast this week that he will not be the run game coordinator in Cincinnati, and that task will be shared amongst members along the offensive staff. And that piece of information alone made me feel a lot better about this hire, because now not only do the Bengals have a better offensive line coach in terms of maximizing individual players, but I think the process of marrying the pass and the run game is going to be a lot more effective, because now you're going to have more involvement from Zach Taylor, Dan Pitcher, and the other major members of those offensive staff in terms of getting that right and not leading it to a guy whose specialty and expertise may not involve what the Bengals are looking for. So this was not a hire that I was expecting, but when you look at the past connections, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, Zach Taylor was literally the quarterback of Bill Callahan when he was in Nebraska. He hired his son Brian to be his offensive coordinator. It makes sense why you would hire a Bill Callahan protege to be your new offensive line coach in this case. But more importantly, I think the process of how everything is going to come together with this new addition to the staff, I think it does make sense. And that's what's most important of getting this offense to be the very best that it can be.